The good news is that I'm like, I would say 99% better. I rarely have symptoms anymore, but there's a whole 10 years of time where I wasn't. I was bedbound at age 26 and I was newly married. But yeah, a lot of it was just kind of like we had talked about figuring out, functional medicine, figuring out my root causes, and then how do you actually address these things to kind of get yourself back physically better, but also mentally and emotionally and spiritually. Like, how do you kind of reclaim your body when you're dealing with any kind of chronic condition?
Hey, beautiful. Welcome back to PCOS Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lindsie, and today's conversation is one I know so many of you are going to feel deeply because we're not just talking about PCOS, we're talking about what happens when your body completely changes, you don't have answers, and you're left trying to figure it all out on your own. Today, I'm joined by Allie Chandler, who shares her incredibly powerful journey from being active, healthy, and thriving to suddenly becoming chronically ill after a trip abroad, navigating years of symptoms, misdiagnoses, and ultimately having to become her own advocate in the healing process. In this episode, we go way beyond surface level conversations. We talk about the gap between conventional and functional medicine and why so many women fall through it, what most people get wrong about supplements, especially with PCOS, the real non-negotiables for healing, hint, it's not just what you're eating, and one of my favorite topics, the nervous system, trauma, and why your body needs to feel safe before it can actually heal. We also dive into the emotional side of this journey, the identity shifts, the pressure to do everything right, and the moment you realize healing isn't about doing more, it's about doing differently. If you've ever felt like you're doing all the things and still not seeing results, this episode is going to give you a completely new lens to look through. Now, as always, the content shared on PCOS Unfiltered is for informational and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are not intended to serve as medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, exercise, or treatment plan. The information shared is based on personal experience and expert interviews and is not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Okay, let's do this. Here's my conversation with Allie Chandler. Welcome to Allie, and for those of you listening, welcome back to PCOS Unfiltered. Yeah, I'm super excited for this one. Lots of good stuff I think to come. So, Allie, let's just kind of start, and I think the listeners need to hear your story. I know it could probably be a long one, but
I know. I know. I'm always like, how do I summarize everything that happened to me in two
yeah.
minutes? Yeah, so let me just give you the cliff notes. So my whole life, I was very active. I played competitive volleyball. I was always like a weightlifter. I did boxing, just always super healthy. And so basically, what happened to me was I was teaching high school and decided I didn't like it and I wanted to go backpack through Europe with some girlfriends. And long story short, it took me many years to discover what happened, but I ended up getting Lyme disease and some co-infections and some different Babesia bartonella, things like that on this backpacking trip. And so basically overnight, my health went from I honestly was the healthiest I'd ever been when I went over there to I can't walk up these stairs on this trip in Europe because my heart rate is like 210. Like it was so, I never had, heart issues. And it was a whole conglomeration of gut issues, neurological. Like I felt like I was walking on a boat all of a sudden. Like it was like my neurological system was like completely messed up and my nervous system was shot. And it just was this huge change that happened overnight. So there's so many more things I could get into with that. But basically, that put me on this path of getting into more functional medicine and kind of understanding, root causes and all these other pieces and how do we kind of like take healing into our own hands because sometimes like the practitioners may not have all the training on whatever's going on with you. So a lot of it was me becoming my own advocate and me trying to figure out like what is going on? Like, what can I research? Who can I connect with in order to get healed? And so the good news is that I'm like, I would say 99% better. I rarely have symptoms anymore. But there's a whole 10 years of time where I wasn't. I was bedbound at age 26 and I was newly married. So there's a lot more like depth I can get into with my story, but yeah, a lot of it was just kind of like we had talked about figuring out, functional medicine, figuring out my root causes, and then how do you actually address these things to kind of get yourself back physically better, but also mentally and emotionally and spiritually. Like, how do you kind of reclaim your body when you're dealing with any kind of chronic condition?
Yeah, yeah. So from your experience, kind of where was the, breakdown between like traditional, healthcare treating you and going the functional medicine route?
Yeah, I think I started in the traditional side because I had such acute issues. I was like terrified something was, seriously wrong. So when I ended up having to fly home from Europe and I didn't think I would even be able to make that flight because I actually fainted. I remember fainting in a bathroom in Europe and kind of coming to in Ireland actually. And all these women were like trying to feed me and they thought it was like blood sugar and giving me drinks. And I just was
Yeah.
like, I'm so out of control with my body. And so I made it home and I went right to the ER. My family got me from the airport and they were like, okay, we're just going to go right to the hospital. And so they had done some of the basic testing and didn't really know what was happening. So they put me on heavy steroids and a lot of antibiotics. And they're like, either way, no matter what it is, like, hopefully this will knock it out. Well, it actually crashed me even further because, there's already a lot my body was dealing with. And so I couldn't even finish the antibiotic course, which I know is not good to do. You always hear, like, don't stop in the middle, but I couldn't handle it. My body was like, absolutely not. And so I guess I had started that route and then I started seeing like I saw a cardiologist just to rule any big things out and pulmonologist, allergist, like all the basic specialties. And it was like, and I don't blame anyone. I think traditional, conventional medicine obviously it has a place and we need it for certain things, but for more long-term chronic conditions, I've found that they only know their specialty, and that's all that they should know. That's all, their training is in. If they're like an ear, nose, throat, they're not going to be able to diagnose you with Lyme disease or whatever else because they haven't really learned that piece of it. And so that's kind of when I started transitioning to the functional space. And I was like, I think there's more going on than really anyone has really taken the time to sit down with me and do a deep dive. Because it was a lot of it felt like, well, you're not going to die today. So see you later. You can leave. If anything gets worse, come back. And so I really wanted someone that would, sit down with like my whole health history and listen to this story and listen to all my symptoms and I did find some really good functional medicine practitioners who did do that. And even then, it's like, how do you find the right one who knows how to find your root causes and you have sort of a compatible style? So there's a lot of pieces to it. But yeah, I found functional medicine because I was just doing all of the research on my own. Like I was literally just Googling symptoms and being like, what could this be? Like my symptoms would change. I had eventually had tracked 130 some different symptoms. It was like every day I would wake up and
Oh
I'd
my
be like,
gosh.
what's it going to be today? Like a horrible migraine or I'm throwing up today. It's just like
Oh
always
wow.
shifting. Um, so it was really difficult for me to figure out, how to get actually diagnosed with something. I want to say it took me 4 years of seeing practitioners before they were like, we should maybe check for Lyme. And, there's other stuff I had going on. I always had hormone stuff. I did get diagnosed with PCOS before that and was dealing with, all the PCOS stuff. And so I think a lot of it is like you want someone to kind of take into consideration all the pieces of your health history and put it all together in like a comprehensive plan rather than just like, this is my specialty, this is all I know how to do. So yeah, I think that was a big, big piece of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that they didn't, knowing that you were in another country, like, I don't know. I feel like, and granted, I'm from the ER side of,
Yeah.
of
Huh?
nursing, but But like that's usually one of the first questions is if you've traveled outside the country, and you'd think that would have been like kind of top of mind
Right.
with your
No, they
symptoms. And
knew. I mean, I was
yeah,
like, I just got off a plane. I was running
yeah,
around Europe for, I think it was 7 weeks we were there. So it was quite a
wow.
while and a lot of, a
Yeah.
lot of different environments, a lot of like new things. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but you do bring up the point of how specialized we are here,
Hmm.
in the traditional side, which, yes, like you said, kind of, can be good, but then
Yeah.
bad when you have some of these different things and they're not talking to each other. The providers aren't talking to each other either.
Right.
And I think that's where it becomes super important. Like you said, you were tracking your symptoms. Like I talk to clients, and I've just mentioned it on the episodes, multiple times about just tracking some of that stuff on your own so
Yep.
that you can also be an advocate for yourself when you go to see your doctor, and that can might maybe help pull some of those pieces together, especially if you are seeing a few different, specialties. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And I almost took that to the most extreme side. You would laugh at this, but whenever I had an intake with a new practitioner, I had like a 50-page packet where I was like, here's everything I've tried, here's every test I've taken, here's the comparison charts of like over time, and like here's the mindset stuff. I had everything, and I know like they don't have time to look at all of it. I feel like it would have been more helpful just to have like a little one pager of like,
Yeah.
here's the top, they're not going to sort through 50 pages. But at the time, I was like, I am so baffled. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know who can help me. So let me give you everything I've ever
Yeah.
done. And
Yeah.
even like health history of like my childhood. I'm like, maybe there's something in there that's helpful. And so, yeah, it was really important in kind of discovering the pieces of it is really understanding and being an advocate, like you said, for my own body, because only you're the only
Mhm.
one that knows how you feel. So
Yeah.
if somebody keeps you keep trying to get help and they're like, nothing's wrong with you, but there is, you really have to just be like, well, I'm going to keep searching because I know something
Yeah.
isn't right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of leads into the next question is, the emotional toll that this took on you, between being sick, not having the answers, going to all these doctors, still not having the answers that you're looking for, maybe getting a little relief,
Mhm.
here and there. So how did you cope? How did you deal with all that?
So I feel like I also had to sort of become my own therapist in a way. So
Hmm.
the biggest thing that I found helpful was I started doing research into like mindset and I got really into limbic system retraining. I had been on a lot of these like Lyme forums once I actually did find out that it was Lyme later. So I started joining Facebook groups for Lyme and kind of seeing like what are people talking about, what's everyone else doing. Like, of course, there's not a one size fits all approach at all for that, as there isn't for most things, but
Yeah.
a lot of them were talking about limbic system retraining. So I was like, well, that's interesting. Let me look into that. And so I started doing this program that required a full hour a day of like, it's sort of, mantras and things that you say to yourself and try to convince your body that I would have really severe anxiety and panic attacks. And it was sort of like, hey, like we're safe. Like you're kind of telling your nervous system, like to stop, like stop reacting like this. We're safe. Everything's fine right now. Thank you for warning me, but like we're good. We're sitting on the couch. We don't need to panic right now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it for me was discovering tools. I did a lot of EFT too, like the tapping, for kind of acute things, but a lot of like guided meditations and also a huge game changer for me was EMDR, just kind of processing trauma and even like the trauma of being chronically sick. I feel like that's also a trauma that people maybe not don't consider one because it's not like one big moment, but yeah, I think coping for me was sort of this journey of discovering what my body needed and what my brain needed and like the mental and emotional support. And also for me, I kind of got stuck in this victim loop of like, this isn't fair. All my friends we're in our mid 20s. Like, all my friends are going on vacations and getting married and having kids. And it's so hard being on social media and just seeing that when you're, laying in bed and you can't, like, like I said, I was newly married and I couldn't like have dinner with my new husband. I was just like, I had no energy. And so a lot of it is like kind of getting out of that victim loop and thinking like, this is what it is right now. How am I going to make this the best it can be? And how am I going to like visualize and, not give up and also not get stuck in this like, poor me, this is awful. I'm just mad all the time and staying in that like negative, low vibration emotion. I had to like lift myself out of that and start looking for like gratitude and all these like positive affirmations and not like to the extreme where I'm like, oh, I'm so glad this is happening, but just, kind of shifting my mindset. And so
Mhm.
I think that really helped, but that was a, couple year process for me to even like figure out that I needed that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the premise, the nervous system, I think I mean, it is for what I do, but
Mhm.
I've even had a number of guests. I have a number of guests coming up that we're going to talk even more about
Yeah.
all of that. So it's amazing that you're able to tap into that, even on your own and discover that that's something you could have been doing to go along with all the other stuff that you were doing. But
Yeah.
it truly starts in the mind and nervous system regulation, right? I
Mhm.
mean, to heal, to lose weight, like your body
It's so
has
much.
to, yeah, has to feel safe in order
Yeah.
to do that.
I think that's missing in a lot of pieces, even in the functional medicine space.
Mhm.
I think it's coming more into like focus now for a lot of people. And I know you do a lot, like you said, with that, but I do think it's foundational. And I do think like people need to do that work first, almost before. Like you can throw a bunch of supplements at anything, but sometimes it doesn't stick unless you're like, okay, like let me get into this parasympathetic rest and digest state
Yeah.
where I can like accept the healing and like my body can process the supplements. And if you're always in this fight or flight, and I was totally in a panic all the time. I had very severe anxiety. I
Mhm.
remember, so my ex-husband was a PGA golf pro. And I couldn't even be alone. Like he would go to work and I would drive to his golf course and I would bring my laptop because I still worked full time this whole time remotely. And I would get on their Wi-Fi and I would just sit in his parking lot the whole time he was working because I was terrified if I stayed home because I was like reactive to everything, food,
Yeah.
smells, light, everything. And so I felt like that's totally a nervous system thing. Like my nervous system couldn't process like any sensory anything. I was just
Mhm.
toast at that time. And so I got to the point where I literally was like, I cannot be more than like 20 feet from you because what if an emergency happens, which it did, and I would have to go to the hospital, with my
Mhm.
heart stuff. And I need you to be right there. And like that's like the ultimate nervous system dysregulation. I couldn't even like
Yeah.
relax at home. And so I had to like I really had no choice but to like look at that and like what are the steps. I learned a lot about like the vagus nerve and the impact that plays. But once I started doing this like really deep nervous system work is when my body was like let's take a breath, like we're okay, we're okay. Like, and it was a lot of that mindset too, like you said, but
Yeah.
there's so many tools for, there's a lot of like really cool somatic therapies and like
Oh
trauma
yeah.
therapies and things like that. But and like you said, even any kind of chronic condition, it's really important to start there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For
Mhm.
sure. Um, so you work in the supplement industry
Mhm.
in a way.
Yeah.
Um, what do you see that most PCOS patients get wrong about supplements? Yeah,
Mhm.
and what actually matters, when it comes to supplements?
Yeah, I think the thing I see the most with PCOS is people will just find some research online and then they'll do one of everything. There'll be like five or six supplements that the Vitex, the DIM, all the big D-chiroinositol, all the big ones, and they'll just go on everything and they won't really have like a protocol or like a plan or a baseline, or if you tested your hormones, like are there, steps to take before we just throw everything at it, and how do you know what's working? And so I think like focusing on those basics like gut health or diet or stress or even like regulating blood sugar, getting that stuff under control first, and even the nervous system work, like there are foundational things that you can do before you just throw, every supplement stack at it. And of course, like you probably run into this too, but quality of supplements also matters. And this is a funny thing because I'll have friends
Mm.
who are like, "Oh, I just started taking this supplement," and I'm like, "Oh, let me see," and they're like, "Oh yeah, it was $10 on Amazon," and I'm like, "Yeah, but there's also like quality, and I think it was just like a magnesium supplement, but it was a form of magnesium that I was like, I don't, for what you need, like you should probably do threonate or glycinate or something different. And so I feel like I have some of these conversations with my friends sometimes where I'm like, well, look at this brand. Like this is a, reputable brand and they do final formulation testing and they have like evidence behind. And so yeah, I think like in the supplement world, it's, working with someone, finding someone to work with who can get your whole health history and kind of understand
Mhm.
your situation and can create like a step-by-step protocol that's probably also going to have some of this like nervous system work, mindset, diet, all those pieces together instead of trying to just resolve it on your own because it's just always better to have someone guide you and have, a clear person who's sort of monitoring that. And so I don't know if like people come to you ever and they're like, "Oh, I'm taking like,
Uh,
15 things," and you're like, "Okay, or 20, a lot."
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Or they've at least tried it, at some
Yeah.
point. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's the thing because everybody is so different. And I
Mm.
mean, from being in the functional health space, it
Yeah.
goes back to how we got there. So not
Mhm.
only, is whatever X, Y, and Z going on with our gut, and we might have some sensitivities, but also, how did we even get to that point? Because that part
Right.
matters. What was our
Yeah.
childhood like? What was the birth like all of that stuff, right? And
100%.
so just because it worked for, somebody doesn't mean it's, maybe for somebody they took all the things and it
Yes.
worked. But
Yeah.
for others, it's probably not going to be that
It's such a
easy.
puzzle, I know, and it's like
Mhm.
such a puzzle, like you said, of even like genetics, and not that genetics are the be all end all, but like all
Yeah.
these things are pieces, right? And like,
Mhm.
have you taken a ton of antibiotics? How's your gut health? Like, there's such a like deep health history that I feel like is needed in
Yeah.
order to understand what's the best course of action. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because there's the quality of supplements is a whole different story, but
Yeah. Well,
just knowing what to
I,
trust,
I,
knowing what's
yeah.
good quality.
Yeah, I will say, so my functional medicine practitioner had warned me about Amazon supplements.
Yes.
And because she had an experience with a patient that I guess was taking something and it just like she was testing and it was like the person wasn't taking it at all.
It was
And
fake or like
coming to
a
find out it's from Amazon. Yeah. So either, I guess, if you look it up, they apparently they can like change the expiration dates on the bottles. So basically, if it's
wow,
expired, the efficacy,
goes
goes way
way
down.
less.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
nothing. But like I was getting a multivitamin off of there that we usually get from, a local shop, but like we were traveling and I ordered it from there and it was like broken in pieces. They were a faded, it was a multivitamin, so they were like a faded green instead of
Yeah.
like, the brighter
Purple.
green that I'm used to. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done
Something's
with
off.
that. Like, yeah. And it
That's
wasn't
so
expired, but
funny.
it clearly had been sitting on the
Something was
shelf
wrong.
for a
Yeah.
while. So,
It's
yeah.
it's very scary too. So I was head of marketing at Microbiome Labs. If anyone's taken Megaspore Biotic, that's kind of like the flagship product. And I actually managed our whole Amazon side of things. So part of my job
Mm.
was taking down resellers who were selling Megaspore Biotic that
Oh,
were not verified. Like we couldn't tell that these came from us. So
yeah.
we had a whole like fraud team and we had people investigating, like, did this account place an order with us? And there were, like, we would buy bottles ourselves from resellers, send them to our global team to test them. And we did find counterfeit. So it's scary
Mm.
because you don't know. And it's not like super, super common, but maybe like one out of every 200 resellers or 100 resellers, there was one that was like, this is not even Megaspore. I don't know what you're
Oh
taking.
my
Like we had a
gosh.
whole process for that. So, and not that, I mean, I'm sure a lot of things are, maybe they're fine. And if they're a verified reseller from the brand, that's different, of course. But
Mm.
the like random resellers that are third party, it's scary because it's like you might not even be taking what you think you're taking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a whole like learning journey for me of wow, like people can make money off. How do you feel okay making money off of like faking these supplements for
I
people? Like that's
know.
such a karma thing. I would never invite that into my
It's
life, but
true.
alas,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But it does. It happens. So no, I think that's a good discussion because people need to be aware of that stuff. You know, a lot of the stuff I get anymore, it's I make sure there's like a third party testing, you know, to it
Totally.
as well. And then I try to just order right from that site.
Yeah.
Because I've even heard the verified sellers can still be partially because like shelf life. Like it may not be, you
Right.
know, a fake product or
Totally.
whatever, you
Yeah.
know, but and it may not be expired, but it still can sit there for a while. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
scary. Yeah, and better to
Yeah.
get it directly from like your practitioner or, from
Yeah.
the site if you can. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved this conversation with Allie. We had a great time recording it. And if this episode resonated with you, I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, where am I trying to force my body instead of actually supporting it? Because one of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is this: your body isn't broken, it's communicating. And healing doesn't happen through pressure, perfection, or doing more. It happens when your body finally feels safe enough to respond. And that's exactly the work we do here. If you loved this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We have some incredible conversations lined up. And share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a review. It helps more women find these conversations and start their own healing journey. And as always, if you're ready to go deeper, whether that's through my programs, workshops, or just learning how to better understand your body, you can find all of that in the show notes. Remember, you don't have to live stuck in your diagnosis. That's it for now. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll see you on the next episode of PCOS Unfiltered. Nourish, heal, thrive.